Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the forum. Today, Diana Chou will be presenting part 2 of Kings, Queen, and Parable, How Christian Art Has Changed in Time and Place. I will introduce her in just a moment, but first let us pray. Almighty God, the fountain of all wisdom, enlighten by your Holy Spirit those who teach and those who learn, that rejoicing in the knowledge of your truth, they may worship you and serve you from generation to generation. Through Jesus Christ our Lord, who lives and reigns with you in the Holy Spirit, one God, forever and ever. Amen. Welcome back, Diana. Diana was trained in art history, specializing in East Asia. She has curated numerous exhibitions at the San Diego Museum of Art and the Dayton Art Institute. She has traveled across the United States and around the world to China, England, Germany, Korea, Scotland, and Italy to give lectures, gallery talks, and presentations. Diana is also the author of many publications, including in the Oriental Art Magazine and Oxford University Press's Benezet Dictionary of Asian Art. In the spring of 2022, Diana will teach art history at the University of San Diego. Please join me in welcoming back Diana to the forum.
Thank you for tuning in again. Last time, actually the title originally including prophet, because it was too lengthy. So I omit the prophet. So now at the second chance, I'm able to put the complete title for my talk is Queen and Prophet and the Parable. Now, last time I ended with the painting of the Mary from the Jan van Eyck scanned altarpiece in Zimbabwe, Belgium. Now, you'll remember that this altarpiece is a sacred art, so it is naturally embedded with the Christian symbolism and reference in the Bible. And in this case, it is derived from the Gospel of Revelation. However, when Christian reference and doctrines travel to the East, maybe it is kind of lost in translation. The biblical messages and stories sometimes would sacrifice in order to be accepted and adopted by the locals. Now, in this piece, which is, I believe, is a combination of sketch and painting, but I will come back a little bit later. Now, Virgin Mary is one of the very few Christian figures that are celebrated in East Asian art, but she is rarely portrayed be alone. So this is very obvious. This is Madonna and the child. Now her image has multi-transformations in East Asia. Sometimes that her Christian facade is unrecognizable because it was a hybrid with the Buddhism. Now I don't want to confuse with how the attributions are changing. I want to focus on this particular painting particularly. Now, it's very clear, that this painting is focused on Madonna and child. As earlier I mentioned, she hardly portrayed as being one single figure. Now, the painting technique is a combination of sketch, and you can see some of the outline. It doesn't look like it's printing. It looks like maybe hand outlined. And then with the color pigments was filled into the space. So pretty much it's a standard practice of East Asian art. Now this piece also very clear is Madonna and child is probably have to do with the halo. Halo, of course, is an indication of the divinity, and we learned that before. Although is begin using in the Western art roughly in the medieval time, but the origin of the halo actually came from way earlier. I think halo is a term actually using is a Greek term. It means something about glory. However, in the art, or especially in religious art, halo has been, at least, is already evident in the roughly 3rd century or even earlier in Buddhist art in India and Pakistan. So I just want to let you know the origin of this halo. And then come to the Christian art. Of course, we adapt quickly and become highly used, of course, almost no exception in after medieval time. Now, so now the function of this painting is still kind of mystery, because I couldn't identify is it either secular or is sacred art. However, is not a sacred art in the sense that we are looking compared to the again altarpiece. But there are several important information of this about this piece, the representation. Is pretty much is a modern interpretation of by using Japanese artistic and historical view of queenships and placing on the Virgin Mary. Now, at the beginning, the last time I did mention that the queenship is sometimes not necessary to do with rulership. And Virgin Mary, at least in Christian doctrine, it's clear that she never has rulership. It's a status. Now, in this piece, on the surface, you might think it is a status, but it's more complicated than that. So I need to explain a little bit of that. Now, this piece, of course, is 20th century, and artist, unfortunately, is sort of kind of unknown. There's, although it's a signature sign on the right-hand corner, but we really hasn't know a lot of information about this artist and why he will portray, yes, it should be a man, why he will portray the subjects like this. If not a Christian purpose, it's not a sacred art, then why would we have a secular art was produced in a Christian subject? And this is a little bit additional notes that Catholicism or Christian doctrine is really not very strong in Japan, also the missionary history. Because Japanese has been strongly embedded with Shintoism and Buddhism. So the number of convert to Christian is quite small. Now, on the left side, I give you the era. Is because of the style of the Virgin Mary, including the hairstyle, including the costume, not artistic style, but it's this costume and his hairstyle and including her makeup. Yeah, there's a cosmetic appearance of the face was adopted from a style came from called a Heian era. And I give you the date, 8th century to 12th century, CE equal to 80. Now, after the roughly after the 5th or 6th century, Japanese dynasties tend to name after the capital as a dynasty. So Heian is the era. I shouldn't say dynasty because it's a different, they don't call emperor. I'm sorry, I don't want to confuse you, but it's an era, it's a dynasty system. Now, so Heian actually is an ancient term of today's Kyoto. Now, but you don't call it Kyoto era, you still have it called the Heian era. Now, what's the significance of the Heian era is that is several important elements. One is the style is that the woman always have a long hair, never braided, was let it grow as possible. But this is only speak to the noble imperial ladies, not a commoner. So this is a very important of this message here. Now, second is the costume, and I have the contemporary contemporary dress up for you to see what actually in the Heian era, that imperial lady, the look, the entire package, how they look, they would completely leave the hair down. Oftentimes they dress at least very ornate of a silk robe, at least 20 layers. And so sometimes incredible heavy. And that heaviness of the drapery, the clothing, will be make the lady walk incredible slowly, okay, because it's the way, entire way. And oftentimes the garment also draped on the floor at least several feet long. So this is where actually this Virgin Mary was pretty much based on the interpretation of the Heian era of imperial lady. Now, the other elements of a Heian era lady is not an ordinary lady. It's not just imperial lady or princess. It's actually quite significant, which means that during the Heian era, the political lineages or the throne or the crown prince or the bloodline of the imperial lineage that able to success the throne really decided by the imperial lady or the bloodline of the imperial lady they married to. So pretty much is the woman, the lady that who the man married to decides if you have imperial lineage. So this is the representation. This representation of Virgin Mary pretty much is well thought through. It's a combination of thinking of the contemporary of Japanese artistic and culture political view, and then combined with the Christian significance of the status of the Virgin Mary. So, and this on the left side is also the 16th century as also depict the image lady from the particularly Heian era. So this is just give you a sense of how they distinct the style is always present in the sense. So when you look at the lady or you look at the painting in dressing this way or the hairdo look like this. And actually the other thing I should say that is about makeup, just a second, that you are immediately going to know aware of. This is not an ordinary lady. This is the lady has very influential power in the imperial bloodline. So this will give you a sense of how Virgin Mary was represented in the particular painting. Now, the other thing I just want to mention about the makeup, the contemporary one does not give you a lot of that. Technically, actually, you notice that the eyebrow and eye has huge distance. Of course, this a little bit, but not exaggerate and all this. Now, the style of this makeup actually, from our contemporary view, of course, is probably not very beautiful, but as you know, beauty is very subjective. So the traditional, the beauty, the taste in beauty at this particular time is that woman will be applying very thick layers of the white powder. Yeah. So oftentimes they might shave the eyebrow. So because they will cover entirely the space of the face. And then they will place the eyebrow in a different place. So that's why you see the eyebrow was quite high. Now, if you apply a very thick, I don't want to say like a kabuki, but there is a little bit like that. Kabuki is much later invention, as you know, it's much later, it's 15th century onward. Now, so if you apply very heavy white powder coating, oftentimes your eyes, your nose, and your mouth become very bland, almost invisible, because the powder it becomes sealed behind the powder. So they were just they will not do much of the eyes or nose, didn't put any highlight, it's not complicated as today, but they will put a nicely red dots just on the lips to show the delicacy. So you can see actually from a little bit, not so much from this contemporary interpretation of Heian style, that actually you see the eyebrow is nicely sort of kind of a little bit distance, and the eyeline is very tiny. And of course, you can see the tiny rosebud red on the lips. Now the second is prophet. Prophet is a little bit tricky. Prophet is not largely depicted in the Christian art. Maybe because prophet is complicated, because the story can be very long. Now the prophet I choose is only the Daniel. I don't know how many you've read the book of Daniel, but I think most people that know the story about Daniel in the lion's den. The lion's den is probably one of very famous story that he was rescued by the angel sent by God. So rescued that he was harmless, was spend the night in the lion's den. But Daniel's story was quite complicated. the complicated part is, I will give you more detail. Before that, I want to say a little bit about the prophets in Bible. Now, there are about 18 books of the prophets in the Old Testament. But if you really count the prophets being mentioned in the Bibles, there are more than 18. But there are 18 was specific dedicated individual prophets. Personally, I really found the book of Daniel incredibly interesting. It's very a lot of story, actually quite exciting. If you like the book of Judith, the first one I was talking about, it's a women's story, then I felt that Daniel seems the counterpart, and Daniel's story was fantastic. So, but then how about the artistic presentation? Of course, we saw this nice by Peter Paul Rubens, one of the famous Baroque artists. He is one actually enhanced the Baroque style into the international Baroque style. But his work is not what I'm going to focus today. I want to illuminate a few things. Because personally, I like the story so much. So when I was preparing this talk, I was trying to find the artwork that actually depicted Daniel. And surprisingly, it's very few. It's really, really hard to find that actually talk about Daniel. And not to mention, if Daniel is one of the actually exciting story that we're going to encounter, then can you imagine how limited for other prophets? Now, for example, I give you another example, and I'm not talking about, it's about the limited of the Daniel, the story. Now, you're familiar with this one. I'm sure everyone knows where this came from. It's from Sistine Chapel, the ceiling, and is by Michelangelo, of course. On the Sistine Chapel ceiling is only 7 prophets was depicted. Now this is the Daniel. Underneath of the C, of course, there's signature indication inscription, so we know this is Daniel. But the reason I try to using this image is try to illustrate my point earlier. Although we understand Michelangelo is a great artist, I have no doubt. I'm not questioning his ability, and then I have no way to question his achievement. However, image like this, it doesn't help us to understand the narrative or the significance of the Daniel or other prophets in a particular role or the relationship with God, or what's the purpose in the God's will. So this is something I want to just kind of show you. And this is really not much about Daniel, at least the way I presented is more about Michelangelo. Now the artists I want to focus on, but fortunately I encountered there are 2 artists that actually has a little more substantially, not comprehensively, but at least substantially can help us understand, relate to understand the story about Daniel. Now back to Daniel. Now,
A prophet in the Bible.
yes, he's a prophet. Sorry, maybe I didn't emphasize that clear. Now, in the Daniel's, the book of Daniel, he encountered 3 kings. So first of all is actually where his homeland, Judea was actually seized by the king Nebuchadnezzar. I know it's hard to pronounce it, by Babylon. And then Nebuchadnezzar's son, King Belshazzar, was also inherited the throne. And the kingdom, of course, destroyed. And actually, this is part of story, is also in the Daniel's visions and also the ciphers of the dreams. And then the final king, at least in the book of Daniel, the final king is called as King Darius. Now, according to the Bible, a description that referring King Darius as the king of Meda, scholars suggest that Meda party already ended before the time, or no longer exists that time. So it's likely that King Darius probably is the king of Persia, from Persia. So this is just on the side notes. Now, the book of prophet, the book of Daniel has 14 chapters. Of course, I'm not going to go through each chapters. Now, I just want to give you a little sense of how Daniel looked and how he came into this particular situation. Now, as the first line, I told you that his kingdom was seized. And it's God's will led the kingdom. Judea was taken by the Babylon. So this is definitely on God's plan. Now, when the king taking over the land, he asked his chamberlain, which is the chief of his chamber, that selected people, that young man, which is on the chapter 1 to 4 to 6, that a young man has no defects and handsome, proficient in wisdom, and well-informed, insightful. So Daniel was selected. So this is pretty much tell us that Daniel's roughly age and how he looked, and also how smart, how intelligent he is. Now, along with Daniel, there are also another young men, and some of you might know that 3 young men was thrown in the fire burning fire pot, which is that 3 young men also is a part of this group that was selected. Now, story going on, and some of you might remember that. So kings, so there's a chamberlain selected all those young men, and they need to train them. It's not just directly sent to serve the king. They have to train them in 3 years. But before the training time, they also have to feed them, and nourish them with food. Some of you know that Daniel was defiant that he able to convince that they only eat vegetables, and instead of drinking wine, they were drinking water. So if you're vegetarians, you really find Daniel is really supportive of your idea. Now, the other thing is after training, so because they need a knowledge. So on the verse 17, which is quite interesting to lay out the difference of Daniel among all those selected young men. Because God gave them, this is them, including that 3 young men I was talking about, that 3 young men actually is, I forgot all the name. One is Michelle, and it's Michelle, and the other one is Azria, and then there's a Hanapia or something like that. I'm sorry that I butchered the name. Now, so they gave him knowledge and proficiency in all literature and wisdom. But here particularly say that to Daniel is the understanding of all visions and dreams. So the role of Daniel, so here's pretty much you lay out the story, the follow up all the story about we're going to learn about Daniel is that he has ability, even without anyone even you have ability to cipher the dreams, the meaning of the dream, interpret the dreams and the vision, even without you open your mouth, especially the kings. When the king has a dream, even king doesn't need to tell him, what did I have a dream about? And he will able to cipher because God gave him the ability. So this is where the Daniel's role is. Now, the artist I want to introduce that pretty much I'm going to focus on, that able to, at least I can able to select the image about talking about Daniel, is this artist, Paul Gustav Dory. Sometimes he just short called Gustav Dory. Well, he definitely he's a marginal artist. When I say marginal, meaning that he never made the Hall of Fame in terms of traditional notion of art history discipline. So he's never included in the textbook of use when you study art history. He is actually, maybe because he's an illustrator. He's an illustrator, and then and a contemporary term would be comics artist. Yeah, comics artist. Despite that he was considered marginal artist, but in his lifetime, he is celebrated successfully with his international recognitions, and has living very comfortable in his whole life, started at the age of 15, okay, until he's dead at the age of 50. And we'll talk about a little bit of how that happened. And this is one of the prints on your left side. Now, some of he was actually born in German. He born in German, and at about age of 15, that his family and then him taking him and travel to the Paris, and he fall in love with Paris. So he decided to stay in Paris to study art. But before that time, he already recognized he probably the skill of a technique of internal drawing probably was already recognized. I want to apologize. I noticed that my internet may be unstable, so I will try to. I hope the information was not losing too much. Now, so from the 15, he was able to convince. Of course, he got a lot of objection from his father, who was an engineer. Was not very encouraging. He go through the career, make a career as an artist. But he was able to convince his father because he was able to obtain a job, actually doing his illustration in Paris. At the same time, he also can say that I'm going to stay in Paris. I'm going to continue my education at the age of 15. So he pretty much he started to make a very comfortable living at the age of 15, and he become really international celebrity in his very early of 20s. For example, because of his illustration, the strength of his illustration is not only the technique, is that he actually able to combine a lot of imagination and the fantasy in together into his in his illustration. And of course, he's also a painter, engraver, and lithographer. But most known to us today is his book illustration. Now, his early work was including several important literatures book. Some of you might encounter his illustration without notice that that's his work. That including Dante, Inferno, and Don Quixote. So pretty much those illustration, his imagination, his scale, and the fantasy will help definitely enhance the incitement in reading literature. Now, one of his ambitious projects actually was the Bible illustration, and later it was called a Dory Bible. Okay, the Dory Bible. Now, I will get back to Daniel just a second. I just want to briefly finish him a little bit. Now, remember that even he was staying in Paris and then make a successful job and life. His work, especially his religious work, which is the Bible illustration, become very well liked by Americans and British. And he also very fond of London. The England really fond of his work, and that's a little bit complicated. Maybe I will come back later. Then he also very fond of England. So he decided he moved to the London. And not only he moved to the London, he established the Dory Gallery right in the London. I forgot what's the street, maybe Milton Street or something. And which he should showcase his paintings and drawings for 21 years. Now, after that, the entire gallery was also brought over to the United States to be exhibited in the New York's Carnegie Hall. Yeah, apparently he really, so that's what I'm saying. He incredibly popular in his lifetime, make a lot of profit, very prolific, but he was never going to indict into the Hall of Fame or the textbook of the art history, Western art history. Now there is a little bit drama happened that he was very close to his mother, and pretty much he spent almost in his life, he lived with his mother. There are a few artists like that, okay? So it's not unusual. Now, however, so when his mother passed away in 1881, for some reason that his creativity seems to suffer greatly, and he died 2 years later. So he died at the age of 50. Now, so his last works were illustration for The Paradise Lost by John Milton and The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe. Now, I will talk about a little bit more when we come back about him. Now, how did he describe it? How did he portray Daniel? Some is realistic, some is a response, but not so much really responding, also completely faithful responding to the description in the Bible. But I think he's the closest that I can get in terms of try to tell the story about Daniel. Now in this page, in this illustration, by the way, this came from the early editions, so roughly 19th century. Most of a lot of illustration, and I also have a contemporary illustration because they reprint. So what we get is because he's an illustrator, and also the book is published in black and white. So there are a lot of, unfortunately, a lot of images that done by him are in black and white. Okay, and there's something we can talk about the color later. Now, so this is where this is where I was mentioned that Daniel was selected to the palace already, and then also started working close in the palace, close the king's palace, and the king has a terrible dream, and he having consult every single wise man, magician, or diviner, whatever is in his court. No one can read what kind of dream he has and what his encounter. Now, but it's not just one dream. There are several dreams actually was that Daniel was able to explain. Now, the first one is on the Daniel chapter 2, that pretty much, I'm just going to give you quickly what's his reading, because I think it is much better if you read it, because it's much more exciting when you read it, and also the language was using in the Bible. Then I just give you here, pretty much just give you information. Now, so the kingdom, pretty much the interpretation of the dream interpretation is that the kingdom, at the least, a Babylon kingdom will be divided into 4. And then there were intermarriage in the politics, but the kingdom was not united. So this is where the prediction of what was going to happen in this kingdom. And it's true, it does happen. Now, the second dream is on the Daniel book 4 and verses 7 to 33 is that King Nebuchadnezzar will go insane and turn into a beast, okay, beast-like, that are walking on his knees and on his hands like animals, and in wilderness for 7 years. And God will restore him to sanity, to his kingdom, and to his splendor and majesty. Now, the best image for display this dream is by William Blake. Okay, this is a little bit earlier than the Gustav Dory, but we consider in the same. Why shouldn't I say consider in the same bracket, but it's really in the 19th century, such a complicated history, especially in England and Europe. So we will get back to how that complicated social changing that actually impact on the art creation, and actually how diverse the art can actually create during the time. Now, William Blake, some of you know, he's a poet. He also very into spiritualism. This is where the England sort of kind of Victoria era, as you know, Victoria era is a long period of time, almost 100 years. But also during the Victoria time, that you all aware that the land of India and the Pacific Islands actually under reign of the Victoria era. So there are a lot of exotic goods and also thoughts and belief was also introduced to the England. And not only that, in the 19th century, it's also in England, also in Europe, that there's a huge, I shouldn't say huge, there are quite a bit of several very different view about Christian doctrine also emerging. So it's a quite complicated time period. So spiritualism is some of the also in part of this sort of kind of derived from this whole philosophical and spiritual and the Christians transformation or reformation, either way how you define. Now, I didn't want to show you too many of William Blake. I tend to think that his work is very haunting. Yeah. So, but this is really vivid explain how this king really became insane. And exactly, he looked like a beast. And not only that, look at that, the way, the look, the eyes, some sort of kind of not human-like, not rational-like in a way that seems to lost the sense of it, and it seems that there's a feel for, or the scary, whatever, or lost the way of you looking the eyes, and of course the body and the structure, of course, and then also very expressive. Now, two things I want to mention, and I will come back on that. There, in terms of our movement, William Blake is belong to Romanticism. Now, easy way to explain Romanticism is that pretty much value the personal emotion, human emotion and intuition, or the subject state of mind, instead of value or measure by ration. Okay, by ration. So this is pretty much just simple words, Romanticism. For Gustav Dory, it's not so much romanticism. And I'll come back to that later because his work, he's more into that so-called Orientalism, and it's very sensitive. And so I want to be carefully when I phrase that. But this is very clear that William Blake, this way of expression is definitely emphasized that part element. And then you can see that the background very expressed, even the paintbrush, the stroke, and even the color, although it's blue and dark in a way, you can see the expressive mode in his paintbrush. And of course, it's interesting that you also see that he seems to also try to construct the body with some sort of muscle line. Now, of course, it's 19th century also, as you're also aware of, that is also industrialism. Now, industrialism, of course, completely changing the social structure and also changing the economy. And those kind of changing actually lead to, in art, lead to the social realism. And realism is something that, in the sense that realistically depict of the object. But also, there are also 19th century also Enlightenment movement, which means interest, pursuit of knowledge in science. So there's a lot of combination of that. So one way in terms of practicality or the knowledge or the learning, you learn all the different things. But the come to the spiritual journey or religious philosophy, then there are spiritualism also coming in, and other reformation and also transformation from Christian doctrine also emerging. So this is where William Blake stands. Now, the second king, which is actually, now the three kings, maybe I should say a little bit. The first king was very impressed. I'm just brief. Was at the end very impressed, of course, Daniel's ability to cipher his dream, but not only that, was finally recognized the significance of Daniel's God. Okay, the God of the Daniel was practiced and worship, because everything was destined by Daniel's God and prediction, not by him. And the second king, which is the Belshazzar, was frightened because the reading was bring the kingdom to the end, so he was frightened by Daniel. And the third king was the best relationship with Daniel. But one thing I want to mention is all those three never really convert. Doesn't matter what is it, so it never convert to Judaism. So I guess this book is not so much or the role, the purpose of Daniel, not so much about converting other people, but more about his ability of a vision and able to cipher the region and the dreams. So that's why I think on the chapter 1 was make it very clear on that passage. It was clear what his role is for his purpose in God's will. Now, so the second one is very dramatic. Yeah, and there's a lot of going on. I can give you a brief. Sees the Judah, Jerusalem. He also take a lot of vassal treasures that from the Jewish temple and brought back to his own temple. But he placed them, he recognized, the father recognized the significance of those Jewish people was worship their God. So those treasure and the vessels was also placed with his own God's, his own temple for his own God, that placed together and was also worshipped at the same time. So it's pretty much placed that was treated the same way, respect. That's what I'm saying. But I guess when this party comes out, this is where Belshazzar had the party with the nobleman and with queen, all those core lady. When he started drinking, I guess he started to get drunk and then he started lose the senses. So he decided what else he can do better than his father, because his father actually expand the territory, expand the kingdoms, and establish prosperity. Yes, according to although the story quite several times, he went insane, was punished by God for 7 years, but he restored. Not just restore, God also enhance, also make his kingdom also prosper again. So then compared to his father, he felt there's nothing he can brag about it. So how he gonna make it to impress his guests or his people? I guess this is where the stupidity plays in after the alcohol's intoxicated. So he decided to send people to bring those gold, the silver cups from the God's temple that was taken from the Judas and bring out to serve. So they started drinking from those very, very important sacred objects. Then suddenly there is a finger of a human hand appear right in the plaster wall in the king's palace. So of course the people were frightened, right? You see the hand, but it doesn't see anything images. Now, none of the wise men or magicians in his court are able to explain what this thing. So of course the word spread. Finally, one of his core ladies say that, remember during his father time, there is a prophet, Daniel. So they called Daniel coming in. Now the word is called a manna, teka, and a prepmas. So pretty much is that God is putting the kingdom to the end, and the kingdom will divide and giving to the Medes and the Persians. Very true. So the prediction come true. And now back to this painting or illustration. This is where a little bit of something I call Orientalism playing into here, which is quite significant. First of all, definitely is incredible ornate. Very ornate. That sort of kind of imagine that this is how will be kingdom in Near East will look like. And several things I would just want to point out. And this has to do also the cost of, I shouldn't say the cost of the Orientalism. I should say the reason this Orientalism has rise is because, of course, because the imperial sort of kind of imperial expansion to other territory from France and from Britain. So the good points of this expansion is that they bring in information from other places, especially a very realistic of architecture drawing, special architectures and also custom of the people of the regions. So they provide those information to those who are not able to travel to actually decide. Now, but of course, there is also certain thing you have to be aware of that this is where it's being criticism about Orientalism is that although they give you a sort of kind of realistic depiction of a landscape architecture, although so strong, but the painting of Orientalism were often painted or interpreted not from actually observation, but from preconception or prejudice. So sometimes we see there's a two extreme outcome for this. That sometimes they present as Oriental is a backward and primitive, is to justify imperialism, a civilizing process. But I say this is not my work. I had to say that this scholar was sort of kind of a condensed phrase, a simple phrase. Of course, it can be very complicated. So it's a justified imperialism a civilizing process. Now, so sometimes the work of Orientalism also show, because exotism, so also show the opulence and extravagance of the Orient or the East. So sometimes the object we can see that it's very luxury or very barbaric. There are the two extreme of angle of that. Now, one of the probably most significant misconception is that in the Orientalism or the Orientalist work, including the philosophy, is that the Near East. By the way, when I say that, I want to explain that when they expand to other territory, Britain and France, the majority information was bring back. It's mostly is about Near and the Middle East. Okay, of course there are a little bit India. We'll talk because Britain has occupied India in some degree, but majority of the concept was specific, referring to the region of the Near and the Middle East, of course, including Egypt. Egypt is one of pretty fascinating place, and which is Bible talk about a little bit Egypt. So that's why part important. Now, the one of significant misconception in this Orientalism is that the Near East was believed to be largely unchanged since the time of the Old Testament patriarchs. So biblical paintings appear to the Western audience, both authentic images of biblical history. So of course, earlier I say that Gustav has a full imagination and fantasy, but he has the sources of that where is the fantasy and where is the imagination came from. Of course, plus his training, classical training. And by this time, the Romanticism will rise, such like William Blake. Actually, they also was try to against the neoclassicism. And some of you really familiar with Impressionism, right? So French Impressionism is also a kind of revolutionary way, try to fight against the doctrine, which is neoclassicism. So they all have the issue. They all have to try to explain, try to explore a different way of portray arts. Now back to this painting, several things that you notice then. First of all, you see those background was elephant head was a part of architecture, really elaborated architecture setting, no doubt. I don't know how realistic because I haven't been to the site or this is where a particular location really is imaginative. We really don't think that he was painted based on real temple. So I'm just saying that you can see this elephant head. Now you all know that elephant is mostly originally India and South Asia. So this is definitely is exotic elements from the South Asia. And using as sort of kind of at the same time supporting, but also sort of kind of decorating. I think both the decorating as the interior of setting. Second, look at this kind of double mushroom, or either way how you're going to call whatever your description you prefer. But actually this kind of combination or hybrid, or it's a hybrid of form, architecture form is likely it came from so-called stupa. Stupa is the earliest stone structure for Buddhism. Oftentimes it's a solid dome shape. So you see the shape of a dome shape, and on the top is sort of kind of reversed another or vary the shape, form of dome, and connect as a pillar. And particularly this shape and also the pillar, yes, it does exist and also in Indian architecture, but it's much later. But stupa was already exists probably first century AD. It was a concrete solid mount, like a dirt mount with some pebbles. So those are shape it was pretty much came from that. Now the other thing I want to mention, and you probably already noticed that of course, their dress. The way the dress reminds sort of kind of mix of Egyptians, kind of more like Egyptians outfit. And then I don't want to go into the detail of the pillar because we'll come back on that. But how about the relief? Look at those relief. We call it relief, and also the polygonal relief. Relief is stone relief, usually pretty shallow. You know, it's not a sculpture, but they were carving onto the wall or carving into the stone, so show the image. This type actually was very common. You see, in the Assyrian dynasty, of course, is Persian. It's a very large territory on the Mesopotamia region, of course. Now, Assyrian kingdom is roughly beginning as 2500 BCE and ended roughly probably 7th century BCE. Now, if some of you have been in British Museum, which is in the British Museum, especially or in the Lakhama, if you go to the Islamic gallery, there was a huge section of the wall, especially British Museum, the entire temple, or architecture, the panel was installed in the gallery, and those exactly the style and exactly the image. Some was almost identical, came from that kind of culture. Now, some of this people will call this cherubim. I wouldn't completely accept that. Well, cherubim is wing-based, and oftentimes was in biblical sense is referring to using as a throne, with the God's throne, the decor of the God's throne, cherubim, and this is mentioned in several places, but also in the Revelation. And I think using this, perhaps it is because it's a God's well, I'm sorry, it's a king, this a king's palace. So it could be using that kind of reference, using that. But again, this is adaptation from the Near East information, is a part of Orientalism. So this is extravagant and also portrayed as should be unchanging in the biblical time, Old Testament biblical time. So this is a part of that. But of course, there's no question, no doubt there, the excitement that was happening. Look at the frightened among people pointing the fingers, say, what is that written? So you can see the commotions going on. So it does giving you a human emotion on that. So definitely also a little bit sort of kind of romanticism, but not quite. So there is a lot of combination of that. So that's why I think maybe he's hard to label. I mean, if he's a popular artist or he's the artist that was more tuned into the popular taste, oftentimes he probably just kind of eclipsed with all the information, or sort of kind of being eclipsed in terms of adapting the style or adapting information, and also using his technique and imagination and fantasy. So this is definitely is not surprised. That's what I'm saying. This is very expected that how he presents of this, the piece of the story from this. Now, the climax of the Daniel story really closed. I shouldn't say closed, but it's pretty much ended at this high note after that he was put in the den. And during the time that he has excellent relationship with the King Darius. So I'm just going to be brief because this also, so King Darius will appoint the 3 ministers and the king, and consider setting Daniel is oversee the entire kingdom. So this is to tell you how King Darius trust also depend on Daniel, incredible trust him. Yeah, and also actually also a personal attachment. Pretty much in the story you can see that he also has a personal attachment with Daniel, especially when he was put in a den, unfortunately. Now jealousy rise. Of course, very often, but then they accuse Daniel doesn't work. Okay, so the minister tried to trick so the minister would trick the emperor. I'm sorry, the King Darius, that said it was the 30 days, something about the 30th day, and then make a decree that whoever make a petition to anyone except for the King Darius have to throw into the den of lions. Now, we all know that Daniel never, in the Bible, say that he never stopped practicing his religion. he know there's decree. He still go home and facing the east direction, was it the God's temples, Jerusalem direction, and pray 3 times a day. Still continue practice that. So of course those jealous, corrupt official knows that, and because Daniel, they couldn't find any flaw and corruption in him. So the only thing they can make this, so they trick in that. So whoever did not follow that will have to throw into a dense lions. Okay. So unfortunately, we was tricked that. So he was brought into the court. And the issue is also Darius king cannot rebuke he cannot changing his decree, the signed decree. But here's where the story that king was really I think my time's up. I better quickly. Anyway, so so I want to close it here. So so the king was actually worried and so stressed, couldn't eat, couldn't and so fast, and also prayed the whole night. And next day he immediately the next morning he immediately run to the den to check on the Daniel and quiet out for Daniel. And Daniel say, God sent the angel and close the lions. So the end is the wicked person, accusers, of course, were throwing lion dens. So I'm sorry that again, I take a little bit longer than I want, but I'm gonna close this. So nope, that's it. And if anyone have question, I'm happy to take questions.
Does anyone have any questions for Diana?
Oops, sorry.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for coming back to the forum. We really appreciated it. This was fantastic.
Thank you.
Just a reminder, next week in the forum is Dr. Mary Doak, who will present Pope Francis's vision for a post-COVID society. Have a great Sunday, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thank you for coming.